What's up, my comic comrades? It's October 1st, which means it's Halloween season and Villains Month here on Variant. And we're kicking off the festivities with a breakdown of the greatest villains in comics, or more specifically, superhero comics. And I'm talking the villains who have the biggest impact on the genre, because as the saying goes, a hero is only as good as his or her villains. With that said, this list was incredibly difficult to make, as there are so many iconic, deserving villains, but cuts had to be made, so we're gonna tell you who made the final roster. Also, this year, throughout the month of October for our annual Villains Month event, we're gonna have several dope announcements for you guys, including limited run merch drops that you do not want to miss. So make sure you have your notifications turned on so you're among the first to know when those hit. With that covered, let's dive into our lineup of the most important villains in comics. All right, to start off any conversation about the most important villains in comics, we have to get the obvious out of the way first, which is to say the Joker is the top dog. The Joker, I feel, is only rivaled by Darth Vader as far as fictional villains go, but if we're talking just comic books, Joker all day, every day. Yes, Vader has appeared in countless comics, but he started off as a movie character and still is primarily a movie villain icon. But all that is neither here nor there. Joker, again, is easily the most iconic and important villain in all of comic books. He's such a good villain, there's a good section of the comic book community that doesn't like Batman solely because Batman won't kill and stop the murderous clown from continuing to terrorize and kill people in Gotham. The Joker has done things like skinned a man alive in the Joker graphic novel. Joker also isn't above murdering innocent babies, as he was about to do in Detective Comics 741. Babies and children are essentially the epitome of innocence, so anyone willing to take a baby or a child's life is an absolute monster. Even serial killers and rapists in prison who find out that someone murdered or killed a baby go after that person, and that's how you know that's bad, when the scum of humanity think what you're doing is bad. Joker also killed Batman's second Robin, Jason Todd, in Death of the Family, and paralyzed and presumably raped Barbara Gordon in The Killing Joke. Point is, Joker does all of these horrible things because in his twisted head, he thinks he's making Batman better by forcing Batman to figure out how to stop him from all of his evil. Therefore, he thinks he's making him a better detective and hero. No matter how you slice it, the Joker is the most important villain in comics. Next up, which is kind of sort of the Marvel version of the Joker, at least in the sense of how important he is to a particular hero, is none other than Norman Osborn, Green Goblin. Much like the Joker, Green Goblin does some very personal things to make Spider-Man / Peter Parker's life miserable. Like in the Amazing Spider-Man 418, we find out that Norman Osborn was responsible for the death of Peter Parker and Mary Jane's baby. Just like the Joker, Green Goblin / Norman Osborn isn't afraid to unalive a baby, and in this case, Spider-Man's baby. Or you know, one of the most iconic moments in comic book history, when Green Goblin threw Gwen Stacy, Spider-Man's first love, off the Brooklyn Bridge, an event so monumental it shifted the Silver Age into the Bronze Age of comics, giving us a grittier era for the medium. Or how about in Sin's Past, where we find out that Norman Osborn got it on with Gwen Stacy, potentially raping her. It's not really clear, but it's kind of alluded to. Either way, she became pregnant with his twins, at which point she vowed to keep them away from him as she saw how he raised his own son Harry, which pissed off Norman. And this is why he apparently killed her, throwing her off the Brooklyn Bridge as a double whammy to her and Spidey. Yeah, Green Goblin is easily Spider-Man's #1 arch enemy. No one has ever done the amount of damage to Peter's personal life that Green Goblin has. Heck, Gwen Stacy's death is one of the few in comic books that has been permanent, as Ghost Spider Gwen Stacy is an alternate version of the character, not the main 616 version. Much like Batman, Spider-Man has an array of epic villains, but Green Goblin is #1 and definitely one of the most iconic in comics. Next up, we have one of my top 3 favorite comic book villains, and that of course is Eobard Thawne, Reverse Flash. Reverse Flash has been underrated for years, but I think as of the CW Flash show, he's finally been getting the respect he deserves, as he is one of the most villainous villains to ever be created. The Reverse Flash is such a good villain, he killed Barry's mom before Barry was even the Flash. See, it's somewhat common knowledge now, but we find out that Reverse Flash is actually the one who killed Barry's mother all those years ago when he was a child and framed his father for it. So in one instance, Reverse Flash killed Barry's mother and had his father imprisoned for life, framing him for said murder, forcing Barry to essentially grow up parentless, becoming a crime scene investigator so he could gain the knowledge to prove his dad's innocence. Reverse Flash hates the Flash so much, dude went back in time just to mess with Barry as a kid again before he was even the Flash. Like, he literally erases Barry's childhood friends from existence so he would be lonely. He pushes Barry down the stairs, moves his arm out of the way so he wouldn't catch a ball during a baseball game. All sorts of petty crap. Stuff that bullies would do to you when you're kids. The Reverse Flash is quite literally literally the mirror evil version of Flash, and he demonstrates what a true villain is all about. Next up, we have Magneto. Magneto may not currently be a villain, but he once was, and has had an incredible arc over the years in comics, but originally, he was the end-all be-all villain for the X-Men. Dude created the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Charles Xavier created the X-Men to help the world and show the world that mutants aren't all bad. Well, Magneto took a different approach, saying, well, if the world is gonna hate us, we might as well embrace it and rule the humans. And with his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, he intended to do just that. Essentially, Magneto was the Malcolm X to Charles Xavier's Martin Luther King. Magneto went on to have extreme success at Marvel Comics, becoming what I would say is one of the most iconic comic book characters in general, not just villains. Something actor Ian McKellen would cement playing the role of Magneto in several X-Men films. But even before that, with X-Men the Animated Series from the 90s, Magneto became a household name. Moving on, we have Galactus. Galactus, simply put, is the devourer of worlds. He is one of the most threatening forces in all of the Marvel Universe, going from world to world, eating them in order to survive. Also possessing and harnessing one of the most powerful forces in all of Marvel, the power cosmic. Over the years, Galactus has been a part of some of the most iconic comic book stories, going up against the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and even Superman in the Superman Fantastic Four crossover. His powers are nearly omnipotent. He is so powerful, other most powerful characters in the Marvel Universe serve him, such as the Silver Surfer. Put it this way, the man hasn't even appeared yet in the MCU film, and everyone still knows who he is. That's how iconic and amazing Galactus is. And I cannot wait to see him on the big screen. Right, Tim?
Can't wait.
Keeping in line with the Fantastic Four for another one of the greatest comic book villains has to be Dr. Motherfreaking Doom. Dr. Doom to a lot of people is the best comic book villain, and there's definitely an argument to be made for that. He's one of the most brilliant minds and sorcerers in all of fiction. Dude is so badass, he stole the power from the Beyonder in the first Secret Wars, and then he stole the power from the Beyonders, plural, in the 2015 Secret Wars. To put that in perspective, the Beyonders are omnipotent. Yeah, Dr. Doom was like, I don't care if you're omnipotent, I'm gonna take your powers. And he did. Doom at his core is a Fantastic Four villain, but he has transcended that as, again, he's one of the biggest threats comics has to offer. He's so powerful, he makes Thanos look weak. Yeah, that's right, Thanos. As we saw in the 2015 Secret Wars issue 8, Dr. Doom killed Thanos by punching him straight through the chest, turning him into ash, ripping out his spine and skull. In summary, Dr. Doom easily is one of the most important villains in comic books, and one of the best, top 5 I would say. But besides that, what really makes Dr. Doom so important is that he's basically Marvel's first villain, at least the Marvel we know now. You see, we all know the Fantastic Four was Stan Lee's first creation for Marvel, and guess who their villain was? Their first villain, Dr. Doom. So in short, Dr. Doom influenced many of the villains that came after him. Now let's transition into the dude that Dr. Doom killed, and that is Thanos. Do I really need to elaborate on this? Thanos, especially ever since the Infinity Saga for the MCU, has cemented himself as one of the best villains in all of fiction. He was a great villain before he ever hit the big screen, but the big screen made him a household name as he was portrayed perfectly. I think it's fair to say we're never gonna get a 10-year run of awesomeness like the first 10 years of the MCU, and Thanos was a big part of that, being the main villain behind the scenes almost from the very beginning, making his big splash in Infinity War and then Endgame. Thanos is actually the one that made the Infinity Gauntlet popular. It's become one of the most popular items in all of comics, from the Infinity Gauntlet storyline and obviously the Infinity War film, such as Thanos Quest Annihilation, Thanos Rising, Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos Wins, and the list goes on. Then we have the original Thanos, aka DC's version, Darkseid. Darkseid has been one of the most iconic villains in all of comics since his creation back in the 1970s. Thanos is a Titan, and Darkseid is a new god, a tyrannical lord ruler of Apocalypse, who is one of the most powerful beings in all of the DC universe. So powerful, in fact, he often takes on the Justice League all by himself, and that's without the help of an Infinity Gauntlet or any other thing of the sort. Darkseid has made a name for himself as becoming the quintessential archenemy of the Justice League. He constantly comes into confrontation with the League in his never-ending search for the anti-life equation, which will give him endless power to dominate the DC multiverse again, much like every other villain on this list. Darkseid has been part of some of the most iconic stories in comics. We're talking the Darkseid War, Final Crisis, Justice League Odyssey, Deceased, the Great Darkness Saga, and many, many more. Oh, and let me tell you something, if we got to see more of him than just that brief appearance of him in the Snyder Cut, he would have reached Thanos status. Actually, I take that back. I think he already has. That's how freaking important this dude is in comic books. Everyone knows this guy and has seen him in the Amazing Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated series. All around, it's fair to say that Darkseid probably belongs on the Mount Rushmore of most important villains. Another important villain would be the Anti-Monitor. This dude is mainly so important because he is responsible for the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, a storyline that literally reset continuity in pretty much everything for the entire DC universe going forward, a storyline that is still having ramifications to this day. And the Anti-Monitor was the one behind all of it. The Anti-Monitor was also the sole guardian of the Sinestro Corps once upon a time, and was also the source of the Black Lantern Corps' central power battery. What I'm saying is he's responsible for several of the biggest impacts in the DC universe, making him one of the most important villains. And lastly, but certainly not least, a villain you're probably like, how did you not mention him yet? And that is the obvious answer of Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor, I think, is probably second only to the Joker, as everyone on this earth pretty much knows who Lex Luthor is. He is Superman's #1 arch enemy. He is an icon across comic books, animation, TV shows, and films. The crazy thing about Lex Luthor is he's just a normal human being going up against the strongest hero in the DC universe, Superman, which just demonstrates how good of a villain he is, using his mind and money to come after the Kryptonian. Luthor has been part of some of the most iconic Superman and comic book stories of all time across all forms of media, not just comic books, hence him being one of the most important villains in comics. But the crazy thing about Luthor is that the reason he hates Superman so much is essentially because he's jealous. He wants to get all the glory and fame for saving Metropolis in the world, but Superman always seems to outdo him. So he tries to spin that Superman is a threat and that we can't trust an alien, so that people like Luthor instead of Superman. When in actuality, he just wishes he was Superman, so much so, he eventually became Superman, debuting as such after the apparent death of the New 52 Superman in Action Comics 957. Much like the Joker, I don't need to convince anyone, Lex Luthor clearly is one of the most important villains in comics, and if you don't realize that on your own, I don't know what to tell you. But there you have it, who we think are the most important villains in comics. Clearly there's a ton more, but we tried to narrow it down to around 10. So what do you think of this list? Who would you add or take off? Let us know down in the comments. But other than that, we'll see you next time when I talk about all things comics.